Dan, what's the current state of autonomous trucking regulations?
Well, first, Grayson, thank you so much for having me on today. Really excited to have this conversation. Actually, the current state of autonomous trucking regulations is really not well understood. People kind of assume that the regulations in this space are necessarily kind of super complicated and a long way off. And that's not actually true. The industry currently has everything we need to deploy our technology and basically everything we need to scale over the next few years. So when you look at policy in this space, there are a handful of kind of fundamental pieces of regulation and policy. The first is the self-certification policy that governs vehicle regulations in the United States. So the way vehicles are regulated in the US is not that the Department of Transportation approves every new vehicle or anything like that. There's a long list of safety regulations, and vehicle manufacturers or companies that modify those vehicles, like Kodiak, need to comply with all of those regulations. And those regulations set standards around things like braking and steering and otherwise. The Department of Transportation has tools it can use, both sort of litigation and regulatory tools, if they believe that a manufacturer is not compliant with those regulations. But it's basically a big checklist. And as long as you're compliant with those regulations, your vehicles are viewed to be street legal and roadworthy. So that applies as well to autonomous vehicles. And there are some of those regulations that are kind of nonsensical for an autonomous vehicle when you think about that. So one is seatbelt laws is kind of an obvious example, where it's kind of a kooky idea if that all the driver needs to wear a seatbelt in a vehicle. And it's kind of a kooky idea that you'd have to buckle in your driver if your driver is a computer. And that's where kind of the next piece of fundamental regulation comes in, which is what's the AV 3.0 guidance that was released in, I think, 2019 by the Trump administration. And the AV 3.0 guidance puts in place a few different regulations, one of which is basically that Department of Transportation does not assume that a driver of a vehicle has to be human, and also that kind of the regulations that apply to humans that don't make sense for autonomous vehicles don't apply. So you don't need to buckle in your computer. An autonomous truck doesn't need to comply with hours of service regulations that dictate how long you can drive, things like that. And the last piece of regulation is a policy that was put in place by the Biden administration called the Standing General Order. And basically what the Standing General Order says is that autonomous vehicle companies need to report any crash that occurs, no matter how minor, when an autonomy system is engaged. And that gives DOT very broad enforcement authority. Basically, they have a panopticon into what autonomous vehicles are doing, and they can regulate kind of by enforcement, by asking for information about crashes and potentially ordering recalls or otherwise ordering companies take action if they are concerned about what they see. So people have this sense that there aren't a lot of regulations here, but in a sense, we're actually have kind of the toughest form of regulation. There's no safe harbor. And DOT is empowered and have the tools they need to look at this industry and look at every company in this industry and kind of force corrective action if they see issues in what they see. But those are the core policies, and there's nothing there that really prevents us or any of our competitors in the autonomous trucking industry from pulling a driver today and operating driverlessly. There's one kind of goofy impediment to scale, an issue around warning triangles, and that happy to go into later. But for the most part, we actually have what we need, even if it's a little bit unsettled and a little bit uncertain.
So there's uncertain. The number one thing that large institutional investors want, that is the majority of our audience, they want regulatory certainty. And you've clearly stated that it's there to some degree, but it's not well understood. Why is it not translating from your world and policy to Wall Street's world that there is a clear path here?
Yeah, I think it comes down to kind of just a fundamental sense people have that I don't think is wrong. Kodiak is an autonomous trucking company. Our ambition is to deploy 80,000-pound vehicles on American highways with nobody in the cab. And we believe very strongly that this is going to increase safety and increase efficiency and lower prices for consumers and generally speaking, make the world a better place. But, I can understand that a lot of people feel a little bit of a pit in the stomach about sharing the roads with an 80,000-pound vehicle with nobody inside the cab. So I think a lot of investors kind of think this can't be quite true, that this sense that the regulatory space is actually pretty wide open. there's something wrong there. And there's also a lot of uncertainty just because the public has yet to fully embrace or get comfortable with this technology. And you may not view that as regulatory risk per se, because again, the regulations here are pretty clear. But I think there's a sense that this could all change on a dime. Now, what I would say is that Kodiak's driven 3.5 million miles. I believe that's the most of any company in the autonomous trucking industry. But we've got probably 8 or 9 million miles of autonomous driving with a safety driver in the autonomous trucking space. And the safety record that we've achieved over that as an industry is incredible, is unprecedented. You see there have been no significant crashes over the course of many, many years of testing in the space. And you've got this really powerful record, which I think shows how seriously this industry takes safety. And I think the longer this industry goes on, the less of that risk there is, because people understand that people are starting to see how safe these vehicles actually are. But I do think this is a space where kind of having a more clear regulatory structure out of Washington would be really helpful.
It will be helpful. We'll get into Washington in a moment. But before we do, from a public perspective, I'm seeing a really interesting divide. And I talked about it in yesterday's This Week in the Autonomy Economy newsletter, where the public on Instagram, X, TikTok are all posting these magical videos about Waymo where the media headline is doing these drive-by nonsensical headlines. How much is it helping you where the public is embracing the Waymos, they're enjoying them, they're posting public stories, and they're starting to build trust in their local communities because Thanksgiving's coming up this week? Well, guess what's going to be a topic of Thanksgiving? I went in a Waymo. Oh, I came to your house in a Waymo. Now I can drink another bottle of wine. Okay, bravo for safety. Bravo for talking about Waymo. Is that helping you?
Oh, I absolutely think it's helping us. I think that we've seen over the last year, Waymo has really entered the public consciousness. And I think that, I sort of alluded to this earlier, but while we're fierce competitors in this industry, from a public perspective standpoint, we are all on the same team. And a win for one company from a perception standpoint is a win for all of us. And I think we've really seen, even a year and a half ago, average Americans had no idea that you could actually take a driverless taxi and that driverless taxi was going to be extraordinarily safe. And I think that's really changed. I think people really have seen these, they've read about them, they have friends who've been in them. And I think that helps a lot. The thing about this technology is that seeing is really believing, and concerns tend to evaporate pretty quickly once you've actually had the opportunity to experience it firsthand. I used to say kind of if you were to poll people about autonomous vehicles, the number one response you would probably get with, that's ridiculous. They're going to crash within moments. Like, what do you mean an autonomous vehicle? It's going to hit the first thing it gets across. And I think showing that this technology is real and that it really works and that it can really make people's lives better is immensely powerful, even if it's our competitors and not Kodiak.
Well, thanks for the hat. I'm proud to rock the Kodiak hat today.
Yeah, looking sharp.
Thanks. You got the shirt. Any other companies that have swag, send it my way. I'm supportive of the entire industry. You're right, Dan. Seeing is believing. You and I can go to Los Angeles. We go to San Francisco. We can go to Phoenix. We can hop in a Waymo. In Phoenix, we get picked up at the airport and go take it to play golf, which is awesome. Not there yet in California. From the autonomous truck side, how do we get seeing is believing? Is that getting the industry together, which I've advocated for a long time, doing a grocery store day where we can show the discount that can provide? Or how do, from the truck side, do we show the public to see, because then they could believe?
I think that we will see our first true driverless truck deployments in 2025. And for Kodiak, that's going to be, we've already done our first driverless runs in West Texas, working in the oil fields. And we will see, I think, the first public road deployments. We'll have our first 24/7 operations in early 2025 out in West Texas. And we'll start to see the first public road deployments in 2025 as well. Really commercial operations actually delivering freight for customers who really need it. So I think just meeting that milestone will be meaningful to people. And, I think kind of when that happens, I agree. Things like delivering groceries, kind of showing this in people impacting people's daily lives can be really meaningful. But I think also in a fundamental way, one of the important things about this technology is actually that it be transparent for people. That one of the benefits of autonomous trucks is that they're not subject to the kinds of human preferences that people are. And so what I want to see as a driver is actually fewer trucks on the road because autonomous trucks maybe are choosing to drive through big cities during off hours and not clogging up the roadways. So I think partially what we want to be is kind of in the background and not really getting in people's lives in the same way that a robo taxi needs to be there when you need it.
An interesting topic on that. I had dinner last week with Attorney General Ashley Moody for the state of Florida, and we're talking about autonomous trucks, and the issue of human trafficking came up. And she started breaking down in great detail, as a really great Attorney General would do, the amount of human trafficking that occurs at rest stops and truck stops. In theory, autonomous trucks can eliminate that. Is that a main driver here to help eliminate human trafficking, where the companies are looking to embrace autonomous trucks for over the road?
It's an interesting question. So we actually think about this a fair amount, and this is one of the questions we get the most from law enforcement, which is kind of the regulator or constituency we work with the most. And I think you've had him on your podcast. On my team, Brett Fabry, a retired California Highway Patrol officer who's done an amazing job of reaching out to law enforcement and educating them about the potential of this technology. I think trucking is an industry with a lot of individual points of failure. And that's true for human trafficking, and it's true in a lot of ways. How does human trafficking occur? And it's a tragedy when it does. It occurs when an individual driver goes and picks someone up, or it occurs at a rest stop, or it doesn't happen at like the big trucking company distribution center. And so what we're talking about with our technology is kind of bypassing a lot of those places where bad things can happen. We're really going to be operating from one facility to another facility, not really stopping en route. And so, to be honest, one of the questions we get a lot from law enforcement is, without a driver there, how are you going to make sure that you're not being used for human trafficking? And it's like, well, without a driver there, who's going to agree to traffic? So I think that it does have the potential to improve that technology to help address that issue. And but I also think that this is an issue where people need to remain extremely vigilant. We've participated as an organization in an amazing organization called Truckers Against Trafficking, and we've done multiple trainings. Truckers Against Trafficking trains people in the trucking industry to understand the signs of human trafficking and what to do when you witness human trafficking. And so we've participated in multiple trainings. Pretty much everybody at Kodiak has been certified for trucking against trafficking. And, I think it's something we understand is a real danger in trucking, and something that we really want our technology help address.
It's a big issue, and Attorney General Moody said one of the greatest things about autonomous trucking, outside of having to potentially avoid the rest stops, is the cameras and sensors, where she can use that data to prosecute the traffickers. And that becomes a big thing. When you interact with law enforcement, what does that look like perhaps it's a senior citizen and it's a blue alert or a silver alert? Do you trade any of that data when they work hand in hand with law enforcement, since you're on the roads and you're gathering an immense amount of data that can be very helpful to society?
We haven't done that with law enforcement yet. It's certainly something that we've considered and thought about how to implement. We've done some work with the Texas Department of Transportation, helping to identify roadway infrastructure issues. So potholes, missing signs, roadway debris, things like that, and helping them to use our technology to find those things in real time, which is, I think, kind of a similar use case. So it's interesting. So basically, the way state departments of transportation identify roadway infrastructure issues is, effectively, people will call in on their way to work, or will remember when they get to work, people who work at the Department of Transportation, and say, hey, I saw a pothole on I-95 on my way into work at around this mile marker. We should send out a crew to fix that. And then they also do kind of a ride along once a year, basically, at most states, where they send out a team of two people, one's driving, one's taking notes, and they say, okay, this is, we just saw a pothole around this mile marker on 95. We need to send out a road crew. So we did a project in partnership with TxDOT and the UT Austin Center for Transportation Research, where we for a week, we were collecting some of that data. And I believe our friends at Aurora did the same and provided that. And we think that this kind of connected technology can really help improve infrastructure for everybody who drives. I think, things like silver alerts and amber alerts are another potential use case. It's not something we've looked at in the past, but certainly as these vehicles are deployed, is an opportunity to help improve public safety.
How would you describe the industry's relationship with law enforcement? So you have Brett on your team, former California Highway Patrol. You have Gary McCarthy, somewhere in Phoenix on Aurora's team. You have Bart Teeter over at Bot from Texas DPS. Three extraordinary gentlemen who I've had dinner with, spent a lot of time with them. But overall, how would you describe the industry's relationship with law enforcement?
They're all good guys. I would say that we've built a really strong relationship with law enforcement over the last few years. And there are a few reasons for that. So, and probably a lot of your listeners know this, but most Americans maybe don't, is trucking is a highly regulated industry. And there are a lot of regulations designed to keep the roads safe and trucks safe. And in particular, you have a couple of big safety concerns with trucking. One is that truck drivers are effectively paid by the mile, and so they're incentivized to drive a really, really long time, which can be very dangerous. I mean, I don't look forward to like a 3 hour drive to the country twice a year. When we rent a house, somewhere on the countryside, truck drivers are driving 11 hours a day every day, and that's a really difficult, dangerous job for the people who love doing it. But law enforcement is very closely involved in making sure that people, keep to 11 hours and don't give in to the incentive to drive much more than that. And then the other is if your passenger car, if your family car drives about 100,000 miles, that's a car that's been around a good long time. It lived a good life. Trucks are driven routinely 500,000, 800,000, up to 1 million miles. And once a truck's driven 1 million miles, it's often on pretty shaky last legs there. And so there's a whole set of regulations designed to ensure that trucks are roadway worthy and are in good shape, called the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Regulations. And those apply to drivers as well. So figuring out how those regulations will apply to autonomous trucks is probably the most important regulatory issue that we had to deal with, kind of in the weeds regulatory issue that we've had to deal with as an industry. We built relationships with law enforcement very, very early in our existence as an industry to start working through solutions to that. And what I would say is that officers who are in the business of highway patrol officers have all had the experience of responding to a tragic accident, having to speak to next of kin after a tragic accident. And so they really understand what it means to keep the roads safe, how important it can be to keep the roads safe, and really understand and have embraced this technology. And that has been a really positive development for Kodiak and for the industry, that we've been able to build those relationships and kind of think about how we're going to handle these issues. But the impact of that has been really positive. And I think kind of when I think about sort of organizations or groups that are most excited about the deployment of this technology, law enforcement's top of the list.
How were those relationships first developed? Was it a cold call? Hi, I'm Dan from Kodiak, and we've got an autonomous truck, sir. I'd like to be your friend. What was it like?
Yeah, I mean, to some extent, that was kind of it. So there are a few different things. So there's an organization called the Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance, which is kind of the association of all of the state highway patrols and actually Canadian provinces. They're commercial vehicle enforcement divisions, and they set standards for the enforcement of those federal motor carrier safety regulations. And almost 10 years ago now, the US DOT actually gave CVSA a grant to start thinking about these issues and start developing processes for autonomous trucks. So actually, this is an area where the government was really thinking ahead. I mean, they started thinking about how are we going to enforce these regulations on a driverless truck, even before companies like Kodiak and Aurora were founded. So I give them a lot of credit for that. But yeah, we more or less cold called California Highway Patrol when we were first getting started and invited them to come and meet with us and explain what we were doing. And same thing pretty much in Texas, where we kind of started with Texas Highway Patrol. But I think one thing that we've learned that's kind of interesting in this space is no one ever actually calls the cops before they have a problem. Like, generally speaking, you get a call from the cops when you have a problem. And so I would say the response from law enforcement, seeing the stakeholder that really, really is excited to partner and work together, has been really, really positive and really strong. And people are really happy to have this opportunity to build these relationships.
They're really happy. I was out with Gary and Brett one night, and I had to do it because I met the gentleman before his untimely passing. That started Cops, the TV show. So I mean, there were two law enforcement individuals, and I said, Gary, Brett, why the heck is everything in Pinellas County and Hillsborough County, which are outside of Tampa? And he goes, that's where all the bad action happens. And they start going into graphic details, which I'll relieve from here. But it was really interesting to get a cop's perspective on the TV show Cops. And we don't need cops for autonomous truck TV show. That I'll say.
That we'd like to avoid.
We want to avoid it, but we do want them as our friends. We will take the positive media coverage. Looking at media coverage, last week, David Welch from Bloomberg was reporting that President Trump could look to implement a national autonomous vehicle framework at the federal level. If that includes trucks weighing over 10,001 pounds, what impact does that have on your job, and does it have on the industry as a whole?
I think it's a little bit ambiguous what that means, but I think it's almost certainly would be a positive development. I think a federal framework, federal legislation around autonomous vehicles would give the public and give Wall Street a little more confidence that this technology is being appropriately regulated and being appropriately managed by Washington. I think the reality is that it is being appropriately regulated and that we are under appropriately strict watch from US DOT, but that message has really not gotten out to investors, the public, and really to state regulators as well. So I think that one thing that would be really positive is I think this would help dispel some of those kind of uncertainty concerns that we talked about at the top of the conversation. I think there are a few different sort of substantive benefits that could happen here as well. So one is very substantively, just from a clear perspective, making it clear that regulating autonomous vehicles is primarily a federal authority, I think would be really beneficial. Transportation is necessarily an interstate business, interstate operation, especially trucking. It's hard to think of a more interstate business than trucking out there. I'm sure one exists, but it's number one. And so I think we've kind of reached the limits of state regulation as kind of the primary tool for autonomous trucks. We are operating, Kodiak does 6 round trips a week between Dallas and Atlanta. On those trips, we are traveling through, obviously, Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia. And so while it's critical that we make sure that local officials understand what we're doing in those states, are comfortable with what we're doing, and know who to call, and we know how to work together and trust what we're doing. Fundamentally, this is literally what the federal government is for, is making sure that there's one set of rules and regulations that apply across that 750-mile journey. So I think that just kind of getting that clarification out there and getting those rules in place and maybe giving the feds some additional tools to regulate autonomous vehicles would be really powerful. There are a couple other things here that people are considering in this space. So one or that would be encompassed. So one that's really important potentially for the taxi industry, but doesn't matter that much to trucking companies like Kodiak, is making it much easier to build non-standard vehicle types. And so by that, I mean vehicles without steering wheels and brakes and things like that, the rolling living room kind of pods that most notably companies like Tesla and Zoox are envisioning. And you can build those now, but for a variety of reasons, it's pretty complicated. And there's both a lot of red tape and some real hard limits on how you do that. So I think that's something that could end up in a federal framework, but it's actually not something we care about much at Kodiak. We are building off standard trucking platforms, and it's going to be a really long time before we won't want the flexibility to have someone jump in the cab if we need to. There are going to be circumstances where just having a person move the truck 100 feet is going to be more efficient than any sort of autonomous system for a good long time. So we're not looking to get rid of the steering wheel. And then I think there's an opportunity to also kind of solve some of those pesky remaining issues, or really for us, the one pesky remaining issue, which is the warning triangle issue, which is basically there's this very oddball regulation that when a truck is disabled by the side of the road, if you get a flat tire, you need to pull over, a driver needs to deploy what are called warning devices at, I believe it's 5 and 25 paces behind the vehicle. So the driver is supposed to get out of the cab and go put these reflective warning triangles out behind the truck to warn drivers not to get in the way. If this sounds a little bit goofy to you, if you are a truck driver and your truck breaks down on the side of the road, that's a pretty dangerous situation. And often the last thing you want to do is go step out into traffic and, and put some little reflective thing in the middle of the road that people may or may not even notice. I was driving with my family somewhat recently, and my wife said to me, "My God, what is that idiot doing, like walking in the middle of the highway?" And the answer was that idiot was complying with federal regulation. But anyway, our driver doesn't pace. And so it's very hard for our driver to deploy warning triangles without behind the vehicle in case it's disabled. And this kind of weird thing is a potential challenge, at least for broad deployment. In the short run, we can have somebody kind of, drive out there if we need to and put the warning triangles behind. So we worked as an industry, and Waymo and Aurora really led the research on this, and Kodiak and other companies in the industry joined it to come up with an alternative solution, basically bright flashing lights, which is a very common solution to this kind of issue. That's what the cops do when they park by the side of the road, is they have bright flashing lights, and submit what's called an exemption application to the Department of Transportation, getting permission to pilot using this technology. Typically, the Department of Transportation is by law required to respond to these kinds of exemption applications within 180 days. It's now been about 23 months. There is some significant foot dragging on this issue that I think ideally some combination of the new administration, legislation, and otherwise could help solve. So there's actually language that's likely in the federal budget requiring US DOT to move quickly on this. That's kind of the like sort of small bore issue we'd like to see solved in sort of a more comprehensive federal legislative and regulatory framework. But I also think there's kind of a risk here, I think, in too much deregulation. And obviously, the Trump administration is going to have a very strong deregulatory agenda. And I think for a lot of industries, that's a great thing, and that is going to help drive economic growth. But, again, we're trying to build 80,000 vehicles without drivers. And I think that we and most of our colleagues in the autonomous vehicle industry believe that certain regulations, frameworks, and otherwise are really helpful for building public confidence in this technology. As an example, I know a lot of people in the industry, when the standing general order that requires us to report crashes, people didn't love that at first for a variety of reasons. I think the way that the Biden administration handled it was they didn't go through standard rulemaking channels. And there were some sort of squirrely things about the regulation. The reporting timelines were very short. They've lengthened them. There's been some chatter about getting rid of that regulation, but I actually think it's a regulation that's really helpful to the industry. And if anything, it should be expanded to govern data reporting at state levels. You should be sharing that data with states instead of states kind of coming and thinking about legislating their own data sharing requirements. And I think there's kind of a basis for a national framework really there just within the standing general order that's a much more productive kind of approach rather than just saying this is a regulation that is unnecessary and get rid of it.
23 months, no response. Tack on 1 month, 2 years. It's an eternity. Why the crickets? Why the no response?
Who knows? They don't tell people these things.
Are you hoping upon Senate confirmation that former Congressman Duffy, soon to be Secretary of Transportation, will seriously take the warning triangles issues up?
I hope so. I frankly don't know. I hope that he does not take it up, because I hope that this issue is adjudicated before then. I think that there's a lot of hope that in its waning days, the Biden administration will solve the warning triangle issue and put this issue behind us. But if they don't, then certainly I hope that the Secretary of Transportation designee Duffy sees this as kind of an easy, quick win. Again, this is an issue that's pretty, blocking and tackling kind of basic functions of government thing. Is the Department of Transportation receives exemption requests, they're supposed to answer them quickly. And this is one way to show confidence that kind of the system is working the way it should.
Now there's an accountability office with Doge. We all have access to Elon. You can really escalate the issue there. Read between the lines on that one, because we're coming. Do you see perhaps the White House and the Department of Transportation building upon AV 3.0 for a federal framework, or where do you see that kind of going as we go into the early days of the incoming Trump administration?
Yeah, I think it remains to be seen. I mean, I think given Elon's influence, I think the question of how to handle non-standard vehicle types is going to be top of the agenda and going to be top of mind for regulators and for legislators as well. I think that there were efforts about 8 years ago to pass kind of comprehensive autonomous vehicle bill that more or less stalled out for a variety of reasons. And as these things tend to be, one of those reasons was bad luck. And I think that there's momentum now around getting something done. But I think that there's tremendous excitement. I think we've had a kind of a very positive sort of confluence of trends. One is, as you mentioned, that autonomous vehicles are real and they're here is something that has entered the public consciousness. You have a sort of a, a, a new administration coming in that has an unprecedented relationship with the tech industry and particularly with the transportation tech industry. And so there's a lot of excitement there. And then I think increasingly people are realizing the national security implications of this as well. Our automotive industry is really locked in a global struggle with Chinese automotive industry, and maintaining American leadership on this technology is really critical.
We have to maintain American ingenuity and leadership on this. And it's very sad if you go through SEC filings with the companies that have recently filed to go public in autonomy, they have a very sad common denominator. They were educated here, Carnegie Mellon, Caltech, Stanford, MIT. They all left. They went back to China to build these companies. Then they're coming back to America to file for IPOs. Again, it's all there in the SEC docs. And then we have President Xi of China declaring very publicly that autonomous vehicles is a national priority for China. And like it or not, they control Hong Kong. He's making it a national priority for Hong Kong. And President Xi has very publicly said that he wants to export autonomy to the world. If that happens, then we're back where we are with electric vehicles, where China controls the supply chain and the ecosystem. For us to avoid that same fate and history repeating itself, or if you want to use the term rhyming with itself, we need to make autonomy a national security issue. When does that happen? Because it is a very big national security issue. And we have Huawei tech going in BYD vehicles, and those vehicles are now off the shores in Trinidad and Tobago, which is a hop, skip, and a jump down the Caribbean chain to the shores of America.
Well, I think we've seen this a bit already in terms of kind of an understanding from the Biden administration of the national security implications here. Earlier this year, the Department of Commerce initiated a rulemaking process that would ban Chinese autonomous vehicle software from American roadways in 2027, and hardware, at least communications hardware, starting in 2029. Communications hardware kind of being the hardware where there's the most risk of China infiltrating our supply chains. And, I think sort of separately, President-elect Trump has called for a ban on Chinese autonomous vehicles on American roads. I think people get it. What they don't necessarily, what we haven't seen yet, and what I think we may see out of the Trump administration, is really a whole of government approach to solving this problem. I mean, you have, the wheels of national security turning on this Department of Commerce issue and banning Chinese vehicles. It's a little hard to understand why a White House that has that level of concern about autonomous vehicles isn't handling the warning triangle issue. But, fundamentally, these are different people with different governments are big and different incentives. So I think hopefully we'll see more of an all of government approach around trying to maintain American leadership in this technology.
We look for, and we all hope we get a whole of government approach to autonomy. How concerned are you, worried about the tensions that are starting to brew between labor in tech? You have Sean O'Brien, the Teamsters, on one side, and you have Mr. Elon Musk representing tech on the other side. And there are tensions, as we saw with the recent appointment of the labor secretary, who is a very outspoken pro-union nominee.
It's my job to worry about everything. And for those of you who know me, I would do that even if it weren't my job. I think that you have a couple, again, you've got unprecedented, and incoming administration has an unprecedented relationship with the tech industry, particularly transportation tech. And then you have an administration that also has an unprecedented relationship, at least for a Republican administration, with labor, in particular the Teamsters. I think the Teamsters, for a variety of reasons, have really been a pretty strong antagonist against autonomous trucks. You're hitting on a real tension here. I don't think substantively their opposition makes a huge amount of sense. Our technology is really designed for long haul routes, which are both extremely difficult for drivers and their families, and also extremely difficult to find people who want to do them. And it's only getting more difficult. But I also understand how emotional this issue is. I mean, nobody likes the idea that AI is going to, impact their jobs, or that AI can do a core component of their jobs. So I get that this is emotional, and that emotion is powerful in politics. And so, you know, maybe the positive answer is that this represents an opportunity to kind of broker an agreement here and find a path forward that can work both for tech and organized labor. And that's a conversation we've had on and off over the last few years, but one that hopefully, as we start getting more towards deployment, and we can have with a greater level of specificity.
Is it really emotion, or is this really about the Teamsters pension fund? Because everybody I've been talking to lately said this all comes down to dollars and cents. Do you believe that?
You may know much better than I do on this. I think certainly they care a lot about dollars and cents, and part of dollars and cents is recruiting. And I think that this has been a powerful recruiting tool for them. But I do think also that I don't know that what we said is really in conflict. I think that it's a powerful tool because it is such an emotional issue. And you go to talk to legislatures, or you go to hearings, and you hear a lot of people say, I'm a Teamster. I've been driving a garbage truck in San Francisco for 30 years, and I don't want a robot taking my job. And on the one hand, you kind of want to, stand up and say, but we're not trying to do that job. We're really trying to do the jobs that increasingly people don't want to do. And it's going to take us a long time to really deploy this. Fundamentally, that's a difficult conversation. I can completely understand why a person who drives for a living has a visceral emotional reaction against trucks that drive themselves.
In that sense, yes, it is emotional, but in this, I got to give credit to this saying to Mr. Craig Harper, who retired from JB Hunt. If you start as a truck driver today, you can retire a truck driver tomorrow. Mr. Harper is 110% correct on that statement. What a lot of individuals fail to grasp because of the fear mongering, there's a labor shortage, and the labor shortage, based on IMF data, we can go down any economic data, is projected to continue to grow. How is there a compromise, at least from a public perception standpoint, where autonomy backfills in that labor shortage? And if an individual wants to drive, God bless them, we support you. You can drive, but without autonomy filling in the backhaul, we're going to get nastier inflation that we've had during the last 4 years of Biden. You think orange juice is expensive today? Wait to see what it is tomorrow if his labor shortage is not fixed.
There are a lot of ways to look at this. Back of the envelope, there are about 2 million trucks in the United States, and we build, or about 3 million trucks, excuse me, in the United States, and we build about 150,000 trucks a year. So back of the envelope, that means if every truck rolling off the line in 2025 were fully autonomous, it would still take 20 years for the entire trucking fleet to turn over. Next year, they're going to be like 100, 150, 200 autonomous trucks that are built. So this is going to take a long time. And obviously, that's going to scale up in 2026 and beyond. But again, that tells you if you're driving a truck today, you like driving a truck, you're going to be able to retire a truck driver. This issue has been studied, and I know nobody understands or cares about U.S. Department of Transportation studies. It's not something that truck drivers are generally reading, but they show that this technology creates jobs and creates jobs across the U.S. and really has only a negligible impact on trucking employment, even because of the staffing challenges. Everybody is hyper concerned about AI taking jobs these days. We have unprecedented low unemployment. Like I'll worry about let's wait until we have an employment problem to start before we start really kind of like reorienting policy against these technologies. I think that there's no reason to believe that autonomous trucks are going to be any different from any other technology that in the long run increase employment, and maybe not even in the long run. This is something that Teamsters are very quick to admit. When UPS started automating their package sorting facilities, it increased the throughput, UPS's throughput, and it very quickly led to more Teamster jobs. And I think there's an opportunity to do the same with over-the-road trucking.
We have to embrace technology. History is our guidance. Look at the landlines, the cell phones, and all the jobs that were going to be killed. Look at all the jobs it created. The individuals that build the wireless depots, the individuals that do all the maintenance. All these jobs are going to be created. Not to mention all the companies, the REITs that own the land that lace it to the wireless tower. There's all these jobs, and history tells us it's going to create. Then the same thing in Hollywood. Oh, Netflix and over the top video is going to kill jobs. No, it created jobs and made a whole entire cottage industry. We have to lean into technology. History tells that. History is our guide. If you don't lean into technology, we don't have economic prosperity. Without economic prosperity, the economy does not grow. If you look at a place where the autonomous trucking industry has been having this back and forth, and we really thank Governor Newsom for his consistent vetoes on autonomous trucking. When do you think, if you had to look in the Kodiak Magic 8 Ball, or I'm going to give you a better one, the Mr. Dan Goff Magic 8 Ball, when do you think we're going to have fully autonomous trucks operating in California?
I think relatively soon. The California DMV has started a rulemaking process for AV truck testing on California highways. That rulemaking process, the ambition is to move pretty quickly for a variety of reasons, including that basically it's time. I mean, we've been talking about this for, almost a decade at this point. And, the way that permitting process is structured and the way the California regulations are structured, there's probably a year or two gap between people getting their first testing permit and actually conducting their first driverless test. But when you're an impatient person like I am, that year or two feels really painful. But in the grand scheme of things, it's pretty marginal. So I think we'll see our first driverless truck test in California probably in 2026. Our plan will certainly be to begin testing in California as soon as we have that permit, and it will have certain advantages to the team to be able to test closer to engineering, but we're still going to maintain our main operations hub in Texas.
Let's go back to the Magic 8 Ball. Do you get your warning triangle exemption first, or are you able to test fully autonomous in California?
I'm not much of a gambler, but I think that we're going to get the warning triangle by the end of the year. I'm holding out hope.
When fully autonomous trucks are rolling at scale in California, what impact does that have on the state's trucking industry?
It'll have a meaningful impact. I think there's a huge use case for the California ports are the biggest and most important in the United States. And if I were a port operator and I'm being told I have to use yesterday's trucking technology, I'd really be sweating it. That being said, I think Texas is likely to maintain its leadership in autonomous trucking for the near and foreseeable future.
Texas has the best regulatory environment there, and it will maintain its lead even when California law is fully autonomous. Does the Inland Empire become the second version of Dallas? I'm saying that just based on the per capita warehouse capacity there.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think we're going to see a lot of growth in that area. And I think that fundamentally autonomous trucks are going to start having a meaningful impact on long haul routes. And a lot of those long haul routes start in the Inland Empire. But I think this is something also a lot of people don't understand, is that a lot of those routes also don't start in the Inland Empire. Most freight that moves from California kind of the East Coast moves on trains, at least until you get to Dallas or Chicago or one of the big inland logistics hubs. And so while you'll see some increase of the lower costs of autonomous trucks, you'll see some increase of freight moving on trucks. And there are certain types of freight, things like produce and things that need to move quickly, where autonomous trucking can make a huge impact. Fundamentally, intermodal and trains will still be the cheapest mode of transportation coming out of California for a lot of products.
And I've said this for years, and I do believe at some point there will be a partnership or an acquisition by a Class 1 railroad of an autonomous trucking company for the simple reason it extends the railroad. It becomes a digital version of the railroad, an over-the-road version of the railroad anytime you want, because the regulatory environment to build tracks is not going to happen. So Class 1 will either partner or acquire in that space. I'm not going to give names of who potentially is there for a variety of reasons, but I believe it's something that's going to happen. Dan, as we look to head into 2025, I can't believe it's 2025 already. What are you expecting the industry to accomplish, and what are you hoping Kodiak's going to accomplish?
Yeah, so I think 2025 is going to be an incredibly exciting year for this industry. As I said, we did our first driverless run in West Texas in May. And that's a huge milestone for the industry and really for the world. I mean, this is an important technology. And in 2025, we're going to actually launch kind of not just one-offs or once a day kind of things, but consistent 24-hour commercial service where our trucks are making a real difference for a customer and start to see hopefully some scale on that. And so, a year from now, things are going to look really different, and this is going to be a real business. And that's an incredibly exciting place to be. I mean, one of the weird things about working for a tech startup, I've been with Kodiak for almost 5.5 years at this point, and you spend a lot of time talking about the future, right? We're going to do this, we're going to do that, and it almost feels like, we're like pinching ourselves a bit, like we're doing this. This is happening. We are launching a driverless trucking service. And that's incredibly exciting, and it's exciting for for the people like me who handle our public policy and talk for a living, but it's 10 times more exciting for our engineers and for our operations team that's been building the sort of the foundation of a driverless trucking fleet and now gets to actually launch one.
In 2025, Kodiak's going to be making a difference in building a business. The future is bright. The future is autonomous. The future is Kodiak. Dan, it's always great to see you. Thank you so much for coming on the road to autonomy today.
Great to see you too.